Thank you, Sam, and I want to welcome everybody to today's program. First and foremost, if I was going to go to the evaluation screen, you could probably write down, Andy talked too fast and seemed rushed at the end. And here's the deal. I had the materials and I had everything set out because we really wanted to focus on liability, but then we added in a little bit about remittance rules because there's a little bit of liability there. Is that really what we're going to talk about today? Just a little bit so you get a familiarization. Then it was, do we want to talk about payroll cards and gift cards? Well, not really, but there's still some things there. When I talk about allocating liability correctly, I'm really going to focus on Reg E claims, and I'm talking about debit cards, POS type issues. That's going to be the mainstay of what we're going to focus on. But there's more to it than that because UDAP is scaring the bejesus out of me. I'm seeing banks, and we're going to look at a few at the end of today's program. There's UDAP issues that banks are getting fined with. Banks were getting some Reg E penalties here and there, I'm sure. In a lot of cases, it was go back and revisit this claim. Go back and see if you need to pay that customer. In some cases, it might have been your procedures are wrong, so don't do that again. But UDAP came about, and banks are getting $50,000, $80,000, $100,000 fines because they're doing one thing and they're saying another in their disclosures. So that tells me that I need to cover a little bit about disclosures. So there's some things we're going to go over today that are in the materials. The materials are meant to be a resource. We're not going to talk about each and everything in the materials. So some things I'm going to say, this is a quick review. Boom, I'm going to hit one or two things, maybe in a span of 4 or 5 pages, and we're going to move on because I'm going to hit you with what you need to know for really claims and allocating liability, but you're going to have the materials to hang on to. Okay, that said, let's talk a little bit about today's agenda, some of the issues that we're going to look at. First of all, basic regulatory requirements. Second of all, second-generation copies. If you have an onion skin Federal Reserve Regulatory Service on your shelf and that's what you're using to review, or if you're going into a site that you're not sure that it's being updated, trash them. Get rid of them because Reg E's changing just like so many other things are changing. You can't be looking at old material. So when I talk about second-generation copies, poof, get rid of those because you're liable to make mistakes. You don't want to do that when management comes to you and says, what's your opinion about? And you say, oh, you have to put that disclosure on the ATM. No, that rule changed a year ago. You got rid of that. So make sure you're looking at the right stuff. So want to make sure you're going to have good resources. This is not about ACH, Visa, or MasterCard rules. We're going to talk about where Reg E comes from and how you can do more for a consumer but not less. But questions and things that come in about chargeback rules and whatnot, we've got a completely separate webinar that handles debit card issues. Some that handle Visa and MasterCard, some that are just Visa, some that are just MasterCard, because there are very particular issues that are involved there. We'll talk about it in a cursory manner, but can I tell you about chargeback rules and send this back with a merchant code, whatever? No, that's not today's agenda. Liability, that's where we really want to focus. What's liability going to be after 2 business days, after 10 business days, after 3 months after you send out a statement? That's the kind of stuff we want to focus on. There are basic rules, and we're going to cover those basic rules. Then we're going to look at examples, and those examples essentially will be one of every kind of claim you can get. It's not a huge list. They're going to fall into some pretty compact categories. When you learn what the rules are, you can compact them down, and we got some tools for you that's going to help you out. Skimming does happen. So I've got, when you look at it, you go, my goodness, he's got like 90 slides here. How are we going to get through 90 slides? A bunch of those are pictures, and we're going to be able to go through those fast. The reason that it's there is because when I talk to bankers in person and on webinars, time and time again, I hear the customer had the card in their wallet, therefore they did the transactions, claim denied. You do that, you're going to get fined because it's just not right. Bankers Online has a sister website called bankingquestions.com. We'll get banking questions that'll say, my bank denied my claim. And it really chaps me, and I'll go in and say, you need to complain to the bank, you need to complain to the bank's regulator. They can't do that. They're doing it wrong. Reg E is very specific about things. And it's just not a matter of, I've always had the card in my possession, therefore the bank says you must have done these transactions, turn you down. You can't do that. It doesn't work that way. We're going to talk about the chronological order of claims processing. We're going to talk, hopefully, about these common misconceptions. I've got some bullet-pointed items, and I'm going to try and at least mention those briefly. And the penalties, that's where I've got some information about the civil money penalties that are coming about, because, again, it's not just a matter of the regulators coming in and saying you're violating Reg E. It's a matter of the regulators coming in and saying you're saying one thing, your disclosures say another. Boom, here's a $10,000 fine. Here's a $20,000 fine. Here's an $82,000 fine. Those things shouldn't be happening. They're very simple to correct, and those are the things we need to talk about today. Now, when I have bankers, I was teaching a course recently where I was talking about some issues. I wasn't even talking about Regulation E, but I used it as an example, and I talked about police reports as an example, and that's when I had a banker who came up to me and said at break, Andy, we always require police reports. Well, that's one of the things you can't do, and that's one of the things we're going to focus in on, just like some of these other common misconceptions. Should get a 5-minute break in the middle. It'll be 5 minutes plus or minus, depending on how we're doing on time, because like I say, I basically had what I thought was 2 good hours of materials, and then thought, I got to add. So there's more things thrown in. First and foremost, Sam mentioned the materials. Hopefully you printed the materials out. For the most part, I want you looking at the printed materials, the 52-page booklet, because that's what I'm going to be talking out of. That's our 53 pages. That's what you're going to be looking at and hopefully making some notes on. On the slides that are printed out, there again, I put some things that are in the slides that are not in the materials. Mostly it's those pictures of how skimming happens. And I put that in there because so many bankers don't admit that skimming happens, that it happens to their customers. So there's graphics. The idea is you can use some of this material when you have to go back and train in your bank. So if you have people who aren't believing that skimming happens, you're going to have pictures and you can say, hey, boom, here's a 6-minute interval of how something happened and this person lost money, and that would be a claim. And the bottom line on Reg E claims in my mind is who loses the money? Boom, point the fingers at yourselves because it's your banks that are the ones that are losing the money. And that's what we want to control. We want the consumer to be responsible for what the consumer is responsible for under the law. We want the bank to be responsible for what the bank is responsible for. If the bank wants to say, hey, we'll accept these losses, we're going to cover our customer, not a big deal, that's fine. More power to you. But if you're at a bank like I was at, it would cost you hundreds of $1,000s a year. And that's not, in my opinion, what I'm going to do to follow the law. I'm going to follow the law. In the materials that you downloaded, so you've got slides hopefully printed out, and you're going to see those on the screen. If you don't have them printed out, that's not a big deal, but you'll be watching on the screen. I'll try to talk about the slides in particular that are not in the materials when we talk about the graphics and such as an example, so you'll know to be looking at the screen instead of the materials. On the downloads, let me explain some of the items that you downloaded, and you may have yours in a different order than I have mine. Firstly, there is a series of documents. The first is it's titled EFT Unauthorized Withdrawal Workflow Form. These documents that I've provided to you are in a Word format. You can tweak them. You can add, you can deduct, you can change what you want. The only thing you can't do is go back and say, I'm going to sell these documents. No, Andy provided them to you. You don't have the right to sell them. You can tweak them for your own use. I had one banker who contacted me recently and said, Andy, I used one of your forms and it says that it's an affidavit, and to me that requires a notary. Well, there's nothing that says that because it's an affidavit and a statement of fact, not necessarily one that is like a subpoena or something that's going to be submitted to a court, it's not one that has to be notarized. If you want to notarize it, that's fine, that's up to you. If you look at some of these and you go, well, I want to change this or that, go for it. First form is EFT Unauthorized Withdrawal Workflow Form. So you've got a UEFT is what I'll often refer to as an unauthorized electronic funds transfer. So we have this unauthorized workflow form. It's got basic information, the customer's name, how you're going to contact them,